You will get out of this earthbound state when you rise to the sensitivity of that next planet.
What's up? I'm back. This is episode 60 of Dispersing the Cloud. I don't think I've done a live broadcast. Yeah, clearly the cloud has me. A live broadcast since February. I've still been doing audiobooks and listening to some stuff. However, I have noticed a lack of clarity, one, in my speech, two, in my thought, and three, in my energy, so to speak. So, in an attempt to get all that back and become the machine I once was, let me kind of give you guys an update and get into some of the stuff that I've been reading. Before I get going, one of the biggest changes that I've seen in the last, 3 or 4 months, however long it's been, is my ability to retain and regurgitate information has significantly gone down. And part of that is actually from a book that I read last year by the author Charles Duhigg. He talks about the 4 main ways that we intake information, right? And so we read information, we hear information, we speak information, and we write information. As long as you're doing 3 out of those 4, then you're going to retain the information. Before, I was listening to an audiobook, right? Then I was writing it down, or at least taking notes. Then I was reading those notes, and then regurgitating those notes to you guys. And I was retaining so much. Actually, that author, Charles Duhigg, that was one of the first times I was actually able to quote a book and a person. I was sitting talking to someone else, and someone had mentioned those 4 things of how you retain, and I said, hey, Charles Duhigg in his book, I think it's Bigger, Faster, Smarter, mentions that. And I said, oh, no, that can't be right. I probably just made that up. And sure enough, he said, no, that's exactly who did it. I noticed that there's one person watching. Why are you up so early, you psychopath? I'm up way too early, and I'm not on California time right now. So I don't know who you are, but I love that you are up. So let me just kind of get into what has gone, and I only have like 30 minutes to do this, so I'm going to bust down this book and kind of a recap of what's been going on in the last couple months. When I left you, obviously I was on what I like to call Operation Double Down, where I was going to continue to do all my artwork, continue to do music, continue to do film, and go back to work full time. I have done that, and it is just completely sucked me dry as far as energy and all the above. However, I'm going to start making some time to do these because I can totally see a difference in my ability to be extremely sharp. Who's getting ready to work out? Oh, nice. Very nice. Up early, getting ready to get shredded, Sarah. So I've noticed a big difference when I'm still listening to books, but I'm not getting the chance to regurgitate them, and so I'm just not quite as sharp. Kind of what's been going on, back to work full-time. I'm doing anywhere from 40 to 60 hours a week at a full-time job. I got about an hour and 15 commute both ways, living in a little town called Farmington, Missouri, and working out of St. Louis. So during my drive, I do a lot of my listening to books, and I've been listening to actually quite a bit of podcasts right now, and kind of supplementing in books. And I've noticed that I haven't been retaining the information in podcasts that I want to retain, partly is because I'm probably not talking about it. In an effort to do that, obviously that's why we're here. A lot of things have gone down as far as not necessarily music, but other projects. I hooked up with a company called Anagram Film out here in Missouri, and we just wrapped on a huge project with Compassion International, which is a nonprofit that helps needy children all over the world, and Poets in Autumn, which is one of the largest spoken word tours faith-based spoken word in the world, which is kind of cool. Totally crazy how that happened. I actually met, and I'd love to do another one of these. Actually, me and one of the founders of Poets in Autumn, Ezekiel, we talked about possibly doing a podcast together and telling the story a little more in depth. But I met this guy on a plane while I was coming out here to Missouri to interview for the position that I have now as a worship leader at a really small church out in Farmington. So we met on a plane, started talking, and we decided it was a divine appointment that we were supposed to meet, so we kept in touch. And long story short, I ended up hooking him up with Anagram Film, who happened to be in Missouri. And it's an awesome story, crazy how it all came together, and we're definitely going to have to get on and talk more about that. But really, it's just been a whirlwind. So I'm working full-time. I have a part-time position with the church out here in Farmington, as well as doing some consulting stuff for Anagram Film and trying to work on just projects. So probably the last 2 months, I've been getting up early, maybe like 6 o'clock in the morning, and getting dressed, going to work, coming back, getting home at like maybe 6, and then going over to Adam, Anagram Film, the owner of that company, going over to his house and just working on this project till late hours of night, and then going and doing it again. Not a lot of sleep. I actually slept all day yesterday, and I feel awesome today. I woke up early and got my workout. It's about 6 a.m. right now in Central Coast time, so I still got some time to kill before I got to really be out the door to work. And there's just so much that has happened, and I hate that I have not been keeping up with these podcasts, because really there were some extreme lows in the last, moving halfway across the country for what I would say reasons that are extremely unexplainable to my friends and family. No one wanted me to make this move. My parents didn't, my brothers didn't, I didn't. I completely came out here in faith because I felt like God was telling me to come out here and be a worship leader for a church that's very small compared to what I'm used to doing worship leading at. And that's not to say that I'm so good, because there are definitely some places in worship leading that I need work in, as far as like reading music and composing and all the above. But it was just so far removed from what I want. I was in California doing exactly what I loved. My life was perfect. There was nothing wrong with it as far as I was concerned. I made enough money doing my own thing to where I didn't need a full-time job. I worked on commercials at least twice a week, something like that, either behind the camera or in front of the camera. I had finally gotten some decent screen time where I had some commercials that were running and bringing some notoriety. Oh, the cloud is destroying me. Notoriety. But, I really felt led to come out here, and I couldn't explain it. And being that I came all the way out here without knowing that there was a film company here for me to work with. I'm actually back to work for the company that I left to do full-time ministry. I'm back working for Service Corporation International. Humbling experience because it's a lesser position, but my flexibility, I really, as long as I'm hitting my quota with sales, I can kind of move in and out of the office as long as I don't have a work day. My boss is pretty awesome when it comes to that. So as far as the spot, I couldn't have picked it. I couldn't have picked a better spot for myself. I couldn't have predicted that there would be a film company here for me to work with. I just couldn't have done that. I couldn't have predicted that I'd meet a guy from LA doing faith-based things, right? And then connect those two pieces and do one of the largest projects that I've ever produced and ever been a part of. Definitely the largest faith-based project that I've ever been a part of, working with a huge nonprofit, which I love to do. So anyway, that kind of puts me here. I'm going to jump in, and I got a little bit of time to go over this book, Amusing Ourselves to Death. This was actually one of my favorite books, and I finished it, probably right after I was still doing a book a week, and I'm really far behind. I'm only like 13 books in this year, so I'm probably only going to end around 30 or 40, which is way below what I wanted, but I'm jumping back into it now. getting back on, regurgitating stuff. Amusing Ourselves to Death is super good. Talks about how much media we intake and what type of media we intake. It's totally applicable to really, there's a huge change going on. So if you're watching this podcast and you're going to spend longer than 10 minutes watching it, you're probably part of the group that's leaning towards longer form communication. There's a lot of interesting people out there who are doing it. Joe Rogan is one who does a couple hours. Ben Shapiro just started doing hour-long conversations. Sam Harris, I actually just watched this morning / listened to a conversation with Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro, who are completely different along the thought lines of ideological perspectives. There's just a lot more of long-form communication, and it lines up a lot with this book. I found it ironic that I decided to jump back into it today, and a lot of these quotes from the book are really standing out to me. So I'm just going to jump into the quotes like I normally do. On television, discourse is conducted largely through visual imagery, which is to say the television gives context to the image, not words. Sometimes its form works against the context. So we see a lot of this with, I guess the book talks about it being very difficult to understand complex conversations when I have this in front of me. So I'm trying to watch TV and at the same time understand a complex narrative in a conversation, which is why podcasting has kind of taken off and has really started to pull away from mainstream media. You see, and this was actually brought up in one of the podcasts I listened to the other day. I forget who was saying it, and it might have been Sam Harris who was saying it. You talk about the polarization of these two right and left mediums. So you have Fox News and you have CNN, and they start to get more and more bizarre, because what's happening is they're losing their audience to people watching long form debates and or conversations, and they're finding out that they are more interested in the long form debate and conversation than they are in the 30-second soundbite that CNN or Fox News gives them. And because Fox News and CNN are losing people, they start kind of here in the center, where everybody kind of is above them, right? So they're here. And then as people start to leave, right, they really have to start getting a little bit more of their fringe base, and then a little bit more of their fringe base, and then a little bit more of their fringe base out here to these people who just only want to hear what people have to say about their thing, right? The people in the middle, they kind of just want to hear a rounded view of what's being talked about, but the people on the edge only want to hear what pertains to them. So when they were in the middle, these people on the edges kind of cared what they were talking about, but not really. And as they get further and further and further out, these people start jumping on board from the outside. But it's a temporary solution as the median dies. And in the middle of this is coming up these long form discussions with people like Jordan Peterson, people like Sam Harris, people like Joe Rogan and Ben Shapiro, who are forget what they're talking about. Like, whether you're left, right, whatever. I mean, Joe Rogan used to be this far left guy, and now all of a sudden he's a right winger, which is really weird because he's not a right winger, but that's how he's being labeled. Because anybody in the middle now is really considered a right wing, like, radical person. But I find it extremely interesting just how the medium is changing. And this goes back to some of my favorite quotes from, I think Aristotle said that typography, right, written words would be the death of man, because man used to write words on his heart. Now he only writes them on pages. I thought that was an amazing quote, and I almost see like this happening again. So you have like these Greek philosophers where people would literally sit in auditoriums and listen to people speak for hours upon hours and hours. One of the quotes from this book is presidential debates used to go for 6 to 8 hours, and people would just sit and listen. I think people are a lot more intelligent than we give them credit for. And so you look at like the Greeks and how they went through this age of sucking up information, and it was almost like an Enlightenment era. I feel like we're almost starting on the cusp of that again. More and more people that I talk to that are my age are listening to these long form communications, these long form 2-3 hour discussion / debates, because in a 2-hour debate, you can't tear your person down for 2 hours. You literally have to have a conversation. And within that 2 hours, you can actually give a little more time to someone who you maybe disagree with, and they can talk for a little bit longer so you can fully understand what they're talking about, take it in, and then respond, rather than these panels of like 10 people on CNN and Fox News where we literally have a minute. Everyone's trying to get their 10 seconds of fame in so they can get a 5-second, 10-second YouTube video where it looks like they destroy some, right-winger destroys left-winger, or left-winger destroys white supremacists. Like, it's only like 30 seconds of a conversation. I think one of the most interesting things on a podcast I was watching, it was either this morning or last night, the days are kind of blending together, but it was Joe Rogan talking to Jordan Peterson. They had like a 3.5-hour conversation. It was brilliant. But he said that Jordan was one of the most misrepresented people ever that he had ever seen, because he says some like really far out stuff because he's playing with ideas, and then he'll tell you right after that, now, just so you know, I'm playing with this idea, but this is a theory. What do you think about that? But you'll take the first part of that, you'll cut it up, and they'll say, oh, look, this guy's a white supremacist, or, oh, look, this guy, they want to kill babies because they're pro-abortion, and you get these polarized different views. But I found that really interesting. Next quote in the book, I'm realizing now I'm not going to have nearly enough time to talk as much as I want to talk about this. It's been so long since I've done one of these. Typography, right? Written word. Typography fosters the modern idea of individuality, but it destroyed the medieval sense of community and cooperation. I like that quote. I think I wrote it down because I found it really interesting as we move from median to median. The way that we intake information obviously is much, much different. I've talked a lot about, in this podcast and in other podcasts, of when I hear something, if I don't talk about it, it seems like I don't retain it, right? If I don't write it down, then I don't retain it. So that matters. And there's another quote, I don't know where it is in this, but it talks about that the median actually forms the society around it. And so we can see that as our society moved towards more soundbite, and from this long communication, it's arguably like our populace is less educated than it's ever been. I find it very, very difficult to sit with most people and have an intellectual conversation about a wide range of things. It's becoming more, I would say it was becoming more and more difficult, but I have reached a point to where I feel like it's getting a little easier. In the last couple months, I've actually had some great conversations with people who think completely differently than me, but who are well read, who seem like they maybe have been listening to some of the same long-form discussions that I have, and maybe have a different view on it, but at least are informed enough. I won't say educated, because it's not a formal education. It's just informed on the topic enough to have a defense. The cloud will leave me. Two or three more of these things, and I will. A different, basically, perspective than I do. Form will be the nature of the content. And the form does dictate the nature of the content. For this video, for instance, the form is, I'm doing a live broadcast, right? I have one person who made a comment, right? Because I was saying, hey, someone's watching, you're a lunatic for being up this early. But it's kind of limited, right? Now, people can make comments, and I can stop talking about what I'm talking about. I can lead in, and I can see what they're up to, and maybe comment on what they're talking about. However, no one can really speak to me, right? Because no one else is in the room. and it really dictates the content that I can put forward. So the form does dictate the content. I think this middle ground of podcast / video, because this is definitely not a video. There's nothing interesting about what's going on behind me. I'm literally just sitting in my living room right now with the phone on the table. So there's nothing interesting in the video. It just happens to be the form that I'm using. I probably should just be podcasting this. I need to get more proactive about getting this, whatever this is, Dispersing the Cloud, more refined. And I think my last episode, I was attempting to do that. I just don't have enough time now. I think the last episode I had a guest. I had my buddy JR on, and we talked about Ryan Holiday's book, Ego is the Enemy, which is another one of my favorite books. Anyway, let me speed on to the next one here. Television is not present with us. Entertainment that accept information. That's a dumb quote. I think what I was trying to say, it actually leads into this one, is Americans are the best entertained, but we are the least informed. We are extremely entertained. I mean, you ask 90% of America who Kim Kardashian is, and Pam, what's going on? And they know who it is. So I think that's a huge quote, and we're going to have to end on it because I got to finish getting ready for work here and bounce out, but I'm glad that I'm doing these podcasts again. I think when you think about this, like, you can go on and you can find right wing and you can find left wing people making fun of basically the constituents, right? You're making fun of left-wingers who really don't know what they're talking about and right-wingers who really don't know what they're talking about. But if you ask them things about pop culture, like, they're spot on. I think we are some of the most uninformed people that have ever tried to function in a society. Like, it's amazing that there's people that I've met, it's amazing they're paying their bills. I don't know how they're doing it. You're walking around, you're paying your bills, you're feeding yourself. How? I have no clue. That being said, I think that as we see this shift from cable TV, in the next 10 to 20 years, cable TV will be dead. I haven't had cable TV for at least 3 years. I have a Hulu account. There's probably 2 shows that I watch. I watch The Prophet with Marcus Lemonis, and I watch The Ultimate Fighter every once in a while, and I'll watch fights. Other than that, I don't watch a lot of TV. However, I watch a lot of YouTube, a lot of long-form discussions. I listen to a lot of audiobooks. But I think as we start bleeding towards this type of medium, right? As we start bleeding away from cable TV, it's going to be interesting to see where we actually get our news from. Last year, after I read Ryan Holiday's Trust Me Online, I stopped watching the news altogether. If you haven't read Trust Me Online, that will break you of watching the news, period. As you watch the news, as I watch the news now, I'm just watching the lies unfold in front of me. It's really easy to pick them up once you learn all the techniques. That was probably one of the most influential books in my life in the last 2 years, reading that one. All that being said, I will continue to do these. I'm so sorry that it's been 5 months since I've done one. That's a fail. That's a fail on my part. And I mean, there's family. I've been living in Missouri for over 6 months. I took the job 8 months ago, right? And I have family that doesn't really know I live here yet. So part of me not doing these is just kind of keeping my life private, because I couldn't really explain why I was doing what I was doing. It's going to be way easier to explain it now, especially with the last project we did. It's a straight miracle how that came together. And yeah, I'd be on a shadow of doubt. I know I made the right decision now. But there were days. There were days. That's all I got for you guys today. I do not have a quote of the day because I fail you miserably. You know what? Let's go back to that last one and just give final thoughts. You know what? That was a good quote of the day. That men used to write words on pages, or used to write words on. Let me say it right. Aristotle said, typography would be the downfall of man, because men only used to write words. Men used to write words on their hearts. Now they only write them on pages. Extremely interesting, especially because we're not writing words on pages anymore. We're going back to an auditory type of communication, which has a much broader, right, and much more. You think about the people who can't necessarily read and write, right? Someone like me, who's dyslexic, I really struggle with reading. So in taking information audibly, it's easier for me to do that. So audible messages have a much broader spectrum, and then, even so to speak, if it's just audibly given to you, right, and it's not written, you have to memorize it if you want to keep it. You have to write it down, you have to memorize it. That's how they passed stories in the old days. You know, that's how they did it. And I think there's something to be said for that. That's all I got for you today. I know it's a super short podcast. I was going for like 45 and an hour before. I will do more of these. Hopefully, I'll catch you guys up on all the books I've been reading. There's probably about 7 that we're not up to speed with. I'll keep you guys posted. Later.
You will get out of this earthbound state when you rise to the sensitivity of that next planet.